Everybody, we're going to get started in about 2 minutes. While everyone's joining, let's go ahead and share from where you're joining from, and also as a fun question, what your favorite sandwich is in the chat. I guess I can kick us off, and Kyle, KD would love to hear your answer. I lived for 8 years in LA, and there's a sandwich called the Godmother at a place called the Bay Cities, which is my favorite sandwich of all time.
Oh, yeah, they said, but do peppers or no peppers?
Oh, peppers, you gotta go hot. Yeah.
Gotta make sure. I had to double check on it. Had to
What's the name of this place?
Bay Cities. It's in Santa Monica. I think it's still
City.
there. Yeah.
Okay,
It
on
is.
the list.
It is delicious.
Mine is specifically the Italian trio from this place called Lambo's, which is
Ooh,
not too far down the street, and it's Calabrian hot pepper spread on it. It's out of this world.
you can never go wrong with a good Italian, but you feel like you gotta have a nap afterwards. It's like, nap, you gotta have an afternoon coffee. It's like a whole thing.
I'm gonna go more of a category than a specific location, but I just love me a good grilled cheese, man. It's a good old grilled cheese sandwich, maybe pair it with a little bit of soup. Like, I'm not gonna like call out a specific one. I'm just like, oh, like, well, yeah, grilled cheese sandwich, man. That's my go-to.
I love it.
Yeah, I'll be honest. My
I was
daughter
gonna
makes a hell of a grilled cheese sandwich. I love Liliana, my eldest daughter. She makes a hell of a grilled cheese sandwich. That's my
are
go-to.
you, are you a cheddar or like blended cheese, different type of cheese?
Oh,
Where
yeah,
do you go?
we got to mix it all up. We got some cheddar, maybe put some provolone in there, some Colby Jack. If I'm feeling spicy, put some pepper jack in that bad boy. Right? We can live our lives however we so choose.
Love it. Love it. Love it. Okay. Let's see. We're at the 32. I think we'll go ahead and get started, gents. We'll kick us off. And then we'll go over to intros. So, everybody, I am Andrew Johnston. I'm the head of sales at Superhuman. For everyone who doesn't know, Superhuman is the most productive email app ever made. Imagine getting through your email twice as fast as before, responding faster to things that matter most, and saving about 4 hours or more every week. Our customers include the latest YC startups, fast-growing technology companies, top-tier consulting firms, and we save them about 15 million hours every single year. And we're trying to invent the next generation of email with AI. So imagine waking up to an inbox where every email has a draft reply. You would simply edit and then send. Sometimes you would not even have to edit. That is our vision. I'm excited to be joined by KD and Kyle today. Today's webinar will be a dynamic discussion around the middle of funnel. It will be recorded and will be distributed at the end. Please feel free to submit questions as we go throughout the webinar. But before we move into those first set of questions, let's go to intros. Kyle, off to you first.
Hey everybody, thanks for having me. Quick plug for Superhuman. I am a Superhuman super user, and if you like hotkeys and ripping through your inbox real fast, it's the best. So I'm Kyle. I run revenue at owner.com. So we're a Series B vertical SaaS company. We sell into the restaurant space. You can think of us as HubSpot plus Shopify for little tiny restaurants, like your mom and pop pizza spot that you order from on Friday nights, takeout and delivery centric. Um, we're like 25 million ARR, growing over 2x year over year. So we're very much in that like high pace growth trajectory. Been here for 2.5 years. I was Shopify before, VP of sales before that at a startup. So that's a little bit of the journey.
Cool. KD?
I'll say Kyle's too humble. He's one of the best in the game, and I do not say that lightly at all. But Kevin Dorsey, everyone calls me KD. At this point, I run the revenue org at a company called Finally, based out of Boca Raton. And similar, we're early Series B, so in about a year we'll be where Kyle's at revenue wise, but also doubling up, almost tripling up each year right now, which is just a blast, hyper growth, and we're a platform for small businesses. So we don't do the marketing side. We don't do the front end. We do the back office. So corporate cards, expense management, banking, payroll, bookkeeping, accounting. Like, we handle the backside of all of the small businesses. It's just a phenomenal time here. Also a Superhuman user, which is a big thing for me because I'm notoriously bad at email. Like, notoriously bad. Like, it's in like my working with doc. Don't email me. I can honestly say with Superhuman. I actually like get through email and actually like don't dread it and actually can do all the things. So it's been really good. But I'm looking forward to this conversation today, and we'll get after it.
Well, thank you both. Lucky to have you guys both on here, and appreciate the kind words about Superhuman. So again, today's topic of conversation, or general topic of conversation, is going to be around middle of funnel. A lot of talk around top of funnel. So we're going to focus on a different set of problems and focus area today. So I'm going to jump in with the first question, and we'll dive in. So many organizations default to solving growth challenges by increasing just that top of funnel pipeline generation. I would be curious everyone's thoughts on maybe why this isn't sustainable. How should leaders be thinking about middle of funnel optimization, both instead of or in parallel to that top of funnel generation?
So, not to burst everybody's bubble, but like sort of the premise of the webinar is a little bit of a false dichotomy, in my humble opinion,
Sure.
because
Yeah.
leaders need to do both. You have to be constantly thinking about ways to fill top of the funnel. If you're going to be trying to double or triple year over year, it's just a law of startup physics. You need to grow top of funnel, but it is often overlooked understanding conversion rates all the way through the stack. And so you need to be pretty relentless about optimizing the customer journey, not even just middle of funnel, but like at close win, at the handoff to onboarding, your onboarding journey, and really understanding this whole end-to-end journey and trying to be really relentless with instrumentation analysis and continuous improvement. Um, and so we'll talk about the how a little bit more as we get into it, but I think it really starts with like a holistic view of the business. You need to be thinking constantly about top of funnel, mid funnel optimization. I think most people overlook it because it's hard. It's hard, and it tends to be like very analytical work, which oftentimes doesn't come super naturally to sales leaders. We come from a very different background. Um, so it probably doesn't get the attention because it's just difficult. It's difficult to have a hypothesis, test it, analyze, like be really rigorous. And so we can talk about how to do that as well.
Yeah, I'll first of all just completely piggyback that. I think even like the prep sheet I was going through this is like, ooh, I don't hear this as an or thing. I hear it as an and thing, right? Like it's and you got to optimize top of funnel and middle of funnel. But where I think a lot of people kind of miss on this is I am constantly looking for 2x levers. What is a metric I feel like I can 2x somewhere? And most companies hit a pipeline mark that more often than not no longer has a 2x. Like if you're doing it well, there's not another 2x lever I can pull there. But there are so many orgs that could absolutely 2x the amount of people going from disco to demo. And they could 2x the amount of people going from demo to proposal. And they could 2x, like most companies, as much as they focus on close rate, they treat it as a beginning and an end thing, whereas the deal is lost in the middle. And that's actually where you can find a lot of 2x levers. I think we'll go into an example here in a little bit, but most mid funnel has a lot of 2x opportunities. Where pipeline, if you're doing it pretty well, there's not too many other places you can probably 2x it, right? And that's where I think a lot of people miss is how much revenue is probably sitting in the middle there that they're just not paying attention to.
Why do you both think that? I've seen it, and I get pressure from our CEO too. Of we got to generate more pipeline. We got to push our marketing lead to go generate more pipeline. And I think there's a lot of conversations around that piece. And I totally agree with everything you just said. Why do you think people miss that, or how do you create equal weight on that middle of funnel? And I love the conversion rate step of how do you convert from this stage to that stage. Really, really important. But I'm just curious, like one, why do you think people don't talk about it as much? And then two, how do you make sure that the weight is there on that middle of funnel discussion?
I mean, I'll jump back on this one here real quick. Is personally to me, it's like one, people aren't taught, which is something that I spend a lot of time doing. Like people aren't taught these things, right? People lead often the way they were led. So pipeline, pipeline, pipeline. Then they become a leader. And it's like pipeline, pipeline, pipeline. They were never led to that level. It's actually one of the reasons why I respect Kyle so much is his level of granularity in inspection throughout all these things. Like, so one, I do actually think there's just an education gap with a lot of leaders. They just haven't been taught to do it this way. But second is it's faster and it's easier to point at pipeline. I just point at like, oh, pipeline's bad, right? And then funny enough, it always happens. If conversion rate's bad at the bottom, also companies blame pipeline at the top. They don't even look in the middle. Is he like, how are we effing up the close rate on the closing side? It's always the pipeline problem. So it's easier, in my opinion, for people to point at it. And I think people think it's faster because this is the reality. Say you have a 3-month sales cycle. Say you got a 6-month sales cycle. Well, it's easier to point at pipeline changing now versus waiting 6 months to see if conversions go up. And so I think that's also what draws people. And it's just the speed. It's easier and faster to point at pipeline than wait to see if conversion gets better 6 months down the line.
And it's obvious. It's just much more difficult to understand the intricacies of what's happening in the middle of a funnel, and oftentimes people aren't instrumented for it. People can't tell you with any level of specificity what is disco to demo, what is your demo to like legit proposal versus how many proposals are you doing that are like fairly soft in nature and are a waste of time. And so, like this is why Katie and I get along, because he's like a checklist obsessed details person, and so we end up talking about this stuff a lot. Um, it just takes a level of rigor that I don't think a lot of people want to get into, and it's not well instrumented. So, um, in order to get this information, you have to be really thoughtful about like, how is my funnel constructed? What are the entry and exit criteria at each stage? How do I get my reps to be consistent in the way that each of them are using these sales stages in Salesforce, and how am I reinforcing it so that I can get the right data to understand what's happening? A really clear example of this is actually in the BDR realm. So it's a little bit top of funnel, but this is really conversion rate from a BDR conversation. Unless you have a great um, sentiment and dispositions set up, basically you just see a bunch of calls happening and then some meetings come out of it. And what's happening in between is like pretty mixed. But unless you have a really sharp RevOps leader that can say, okay, here are the two different sentiments, the I connected with the person or a gatekeeper or something else, and then the disposition under each of those things is like connected call, pitch out, or wrong person, or like objection XYZ, wrong timeline. We have a big grid that our head of RevOps outlined, that I presented at GTM 2024. And like, unless you have that level of granularity, you can't go problem solve there. You can't solve that problem. And so that's like, it's just hard work. You have to be like, okay, well, until we solve the data input and instrumentation, we won't know the conversion rates. And so people are like, what about just more funnel? Like, what about
Yeah.
just like make more calls? And so I think there's a
Yeah.
discipline and there's oftentimes an infrastructure that's missing that makes it hard for people to diagnose their root cause problem to really go fix mid funnel.
I also think it's just so hard, the risk, right? If you go pipe a ton of top of funnel and just spend there, and then you can't convert those leads, move them through the funnel the right way, one, you're just going to drive and spend dollars and you can't go back to those leads. And two, if you're not optimizing for the close, you can't go back to marketing and say, I want X more type of this lead, such that maybe it requires less funnel because there's a higher intent and that lead score really matters. And so I think people just, orient towards drive more pipe, but they don't solve that granular problem, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
And as much as I love to blame marketing, which I do, I actually get personal joy out of it. We actually have a rule with it. I don't know if we have any marketers here, but it's always your fault. Don't worry about it.
Play nice, play nice.
Oh no. I love marketing. I've had great relationships with almost all of my marketing leaders. It's actually because of what I'm about to share is we actually have a very, very strict rule on we cannot complain about leads unless we are doing our job properly. Meaning, if our lead follow-up is good, and our messaging is good, and our disco is good, and our demo call score is good, and our follow-up is good, and our proposals is good, and our multi-threading is good, if we're doing all that and they're not converting, then I can go yell at marketing. But if we're not doing our part, that's on us. And we cannot go to marketing and complain if we're not doing our side of things, right? And that's what I think happens too often is like things aren't converting. So people they blame marketing without actually looking and seeing like, are we doing the things that we need to do? I blame marketing just for fun. I just like to keep them on their toes. Like I just like to walk in there and razz them a little bit. That's all I'm really doing. Like I know it's our job to convert these things.
I love it. That brings me to my next question. Actually, it's a really good leading point. You talked about maybe those like 6 or 7 things that you're looking for in the sales cycle, but what are the signals for either of you that would indicate maybe there is a problem on sales not doing its job in middle funnel? And then do you have any particular frameworks, or how do you diagnose those, and maybe what do you do to attack those problems?
So you got to sketch out every stage and be really specific about entry and exit criteria. And it's going to look different for every business. Like we are mostly one call closes or two call closes in our business. I've previously sold enterprise, which looks very, very different. But at the same time, the fundamentals are the same. You have to very clearly outline each individual stage, try to do it in the customer's language as much as you can, establish entry and exit criteria, and then drive consistency across the team in terms of how those Salesforce stages are using. Like you have to start with the credibility of the data. Then when you have the data, honestly, it's going to become pretty obvious. Like you're going to have stages. You're going to have stages that convert at 40%. You're going to have a stage that converts at 17%. And so Katie's saying at the beginning, finding those 2x opportunities is a great way to think about it. I have this decision-making framework that I've borrowed from Annie Duke a little bit, who wrote Thinking in Bets. And the framework is basically payoff probability perspiration. So if I look at each one of these stages and I come up with some hypotheses, like, okay, I've got a 17% conversion rate here, a 35% here, and to move the 35%er, I have like these 3 ideas. You can look at all of these ideas and evaluate them. Okay, what's the payoff at moving them? If I execute this project, what's the likely increase? So I have one rep that's converting at 40% and the average is 17. So potentially I should anticipate that I could get my whole team there to 35%. So that's the payoff. Number 2, what's the probability of me actually getting people there? And you'll have a good understanding of like, how probable is this thing to work out? Is this like a Hail Mary bet? We're going to do something completely unproven that we've never really tried before? Or is it just about replicating something that your best rep does and you need to have that done consistently? Okay, much higher probability of it working out. And then finally, what's the perspiration? How hard is this project going to be? Is it like a total rewrite of your demo script? Or is this just having slightly better sell between materials that you need to get everybody to use instead of just like your one best rep? And so then you can look at those 3 things. What's the payoff of this thing? What's the probability that it works? What's the effort, the perspiration to get that thing, to execute that project? And honestly, the answers become like sort of obvious at that point. Some of those opportunities will jump off the page to you, and then you just block and tackle. You got to execute the work and be really good about got to be really great about change management and deploying change. And hopefully we can touch on that a little bit later, because that's adoption and change management is 70% of the game, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think the big thing for me, if I'm looking at things to look at, and I have a full deal management doc. Like if it's a certain deal size, Kyle mentioned like checklist. Like if it's a certain size of a deal, once it crosses a certain stage, it's going into a deal management like doc, where it's a step by step. Like these are the things. Like I obsess. Like I joke about this with my team a lot. To succeed, you have to be obsessed with BS, is what I tell them. But not the BS everybody thinks. BS to me stands for behaviors and skills. Right? Just for success, you have to just obsess over BS. So I'm looking at the behaviors of my team, but also the behaviors of the prospect. That's what's letting me know what the health of a deal is. Are we doing the right things behaviorally? Well, that's the follow-up, the pre-confirmation, the whatever else, behaviors. But also, what are the behaviors of the buyer? If the buyer hasn't opened the proposal, I know a lot. If a buyer has not responded back to a call, I know a lot. And it's the behaviors that to me signal the health of a deal. If I ask Andrew to get something done by Friday and then he does, buyer behavior, it's strong. This is a strong deal. I ask Andrew to get something done by Friday. Not only does he not, but I don't hear from him for another week and a half. Low buyer behavior, weak deal. So that's what I'm looking at to really in that middle funnel is what are our behaviors? Are we doing the right things as sellers? But then also, is the buyer displaying the behaviors of a high confidence deal. So that's how I'm also grading. And then I look at skills. This is where like deal management checklist comes in. Is like, do we have the things to make a strong deal? So if I'm trying to pitch to Kyle, and if I'm selling like owner, and I never find out like how many customers they have right now, well, I'm missing a very key data point that I know if that's not there, it's going to be a less likelihood that I close this deal, right? And so that's where the skill element comes in. Are we doing the right things and gathering the right information? And I try to be very proactive with this stuff because every leader on here, if we have a lot of leaders, yeah, actually, I don't know if people dropped their titles in the chat or not, but a lot of the leaders, you have a deal management checklist. It just lives in your head. Every single one of you knows that if I came to you and I was a rep and I said, hey, this deal is going to close by the end of the month, you're going to have a list of questions that you're going to ask me to test the strength of that. I just put those questions on paper and you're answering those before I ever have to ask it, right? So that's what gives me better insight into the strength of a deal.
Love it. I've got questions for each of you. Kyle, on your end, would be curious. Obviously, there's differences in different types of segments that you're selling, whether you're enterprise or SMB, but is there any pattern matching that you've seen across areas of those different pieces of that middle of funnel that you find commonly are not done well, or are typically like the problem areas that you want to focus on, or is it just vary so greatly?
No, the specifics vary a lot, but the principles I think are pretty similar. Katie was talking a lot about what it is. Like if you zoom out and ask, if you zoom out and what is Katie describing in terms of having clear documentation, rigorous analysis of every deal, we're just talking about discipline. We're just talking about like discipline with everything that you do, discipline as a leader to document things clearly, show people what good looks like, have assets and guides that they can reference for each of these things. And then the reps need to be disciplined to follow what you've built, and the managers need to be disciplined to like keep people on task. And it's the little things. So a good example is pre-call research. Like we got really obsessed with pre-call research a couple quarters ago, and win rates jumped like instantaneously. And so we got rigorous with what like everybody doing it every single time and making sure that it's done in a consistent manner and we're capturing it. And then we started celebrating it and the managers were reviewing it constantly. We gave coaching on it. And so pre-call research SMB or looks very different than pre-call research for enterprise, but it's the same thing. It's just about being disciplined on in everything that you do.
Katie, anything to add? I'll be curious. Any other enforcement techniques that you found that works well? Like I love the discipline element. Sometimes the enforcement or tactics for leaders to enforcing these sorts of things, I think is really important.
Yeah, that's where the documentation comes in. But I'll say the most common thing that I see in mid funnel is reps aren't selling the next step. They're telling you.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
So enterprise or SMB, all the same things have to happen. You have to sell the next step. And too often sellers sell the product, but they don't sell the next step. So let's say normally the next step is I need to get Kyle on the call, and Kyle is Andrew's boss. Well, reps oftentimes are like they talk to Andrew, and then they say, all right, so like, when can we get Kyle on? And Andrew's like, I'll talk to Kyle. Where if I'm doing the right, I'm selling getting Kyle on throughout the entire demo. I'm seeding it. I'm saying, actually, so this part here, you're going to love this. But when Kyle sees it, this is why he's going to love this. And then I'm selling the next step. I'm selling it, right? Whereas most reps, they tell it. And we talk about this as leaders and as sellers often. Sell, don't tell. Too often reps tell what the next steps are. So the next steps are, we do a proof of concept and blah, 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 blah. That's telling. Sell the next step. What is the thing that you are trying to do, but you got to make them want to do that thing. That's the most common thing that I see sellers miss in the middle of the funnel is they're not selling the next step. By the time you get to asking for it, it should be just a God-given conclusion that's going to come, because I've been selling that idea the entire time and you see the benefit in doing that thing. So that would be the thing I would call out. And those are things that we put in our call scorecards. Those are things we look for in the transcripts. Those are things that we really coach heavily around.
In my parlance, I call it an offer of value. So what is your offer of value for that prospect to show up at the next thing? And if you frame it this way, like, are you trying to convince them to come to a call that's sort of a pain in the butt? Or is there some reason that this person and their boss would legitimately be like, yeah, I sort of want to get on that call because you're
Mhm.
going to show them uh, a custom solution based on the exact things that you're talking about, and you're going to show them a customer that is doing a similar thing and give them um, an inside view into how other companies have solved this challenge. Not, hey, let me demo you my product, but like, let me actually. Andrew from Superhuman, they did the same thing. They were trying to do X. Like I can walk you through their demo checklist and how they've architected that into the product and blah 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 blah. And you're like, okay, like I'm willing to show up to see that. And so if you just get it in your head at the end of the call, you're trying to architect and offer a value for the people that you want to be in the next call to want to be there. Yeah,
Mhm.
it's mission critical.
Do either of you, are you guys like a medic shops? Do you guys use a certain methodology to help enforce some of this, or have you built kind of your own methodology of how you're capturing that information for a rep to know that they're asking the right questions, understand the right levers in a deal?
Yeah,
We use
mine,
Spice. Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
Like to me, so many of the methodologies to me are a lot like diets. They work if you follow them. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's
Mm.
actually finding the methodology that works for you or is easy to follow. But the concepts are all very similar. We're all looking for situational things. We're all looking for some sort of economic impact. We're all looking sort of for the problem, what the buying process is, what the decision criteria is, what like they all kind of overlap. But we take the methodology and we build it into scorecards, and we actually have within the scorecards, here's the right way to be gathering that information, right? And then more importantly, so I know it's not the topic of the webinar, but how are we using the information?
Hmm.
Because what happens with a
Hmm.
lot of reps with the med picks, the spiced of the worlds, the bants, the spins, is they get the information. They're not
Yeah.
using it. They got
Yeah.
it, but they're not using it. And those are things that we're looking for. It's like, is the proposal problem based? Right?
Mhm.
Or did you just send us like I think Kyle got like it's a soft proposal, or maybe you said it, it's like a soft proposal, or
Mhm.
does that proposal have the problems they agreed to? Where are we tracking those problems on the deal management doc? Like all of those things kind of connect through. So that's kind of how I look at it.
Big plus one.
Love that.
Spiced medic doesn't really matter. It's
Yep.
it's you could use your own as long as you're driving adoption. That's the thing.
Yeah. One thing I'll add, just kind of my own experience, is two things that really resonate. One, the discipline thing. I had an old mentor who used to always say, ask the reps what's in their locus of control. So your rep comes to you, they'll complain about, I'm not getting a pipeline, I'm not here. The question you always come back to is like, what can you control in this deal? And then if they're not controlling enough variables, you can really start to hone in on that action step for them, which I love. It's super simple, but just a great step. And then the other one he also taught me was, if you're going to measure it as a leader, they're going to care about it. And I think that one is super, like, I always forget that, where you say, oh, let's look at this, let's look at that. But if you actually measure it and you come back to it, they're going to start looking at that and thinking about it. And it's like that repetitiveness inside of whether it's deal reviews, however you're looking at in a pipeline call. That's one that I always come back to, of like, we're going to measure it, we're going to look at what that means.
And if you want to drive adoption, just do one thing at a time. I harp on
Yeah.
this constantly. Great coaching has to be highly focused. And so just say like the one thing that we're going to work on for the next 30 days together is you leveraging the notes that you took on call one on call two. And that's
Mm-hmm.
it. And so then you could
Mm-hmm.
think of, okay, what are all the activities we could do together to help that person do that thing? It's okay, we're gonna, before every second call you go into, we're gonna have a 5 minute huddle. We're gonna review your notes together, and we're gonna talk about the thing that we're gonna do at the beginning of the next call to tie those things together. And then we're gonna review like 2 or 3 calls every single week where we just review the first part of your second call in contrast to the notes that you've taken. And because
Yeah.
we're talking about a lot of different stuff, and it's going to feel overwhelming. It's way more overwhelming for your reps. So just what's the one thing, and then do it for a long enough period of time where you've really built that as a new habit, so that when you go on to the next thing, the thing you teach doesn't just get forgotten right away. There's a thing called the forgetting curve, and
Mm-hmm.
if you teach somebody something one week and then you never talk about it again, that is gone from their brain. So you need to reinforce for a series of weeks on that topic until it becomes their normal thing that they just do every time, and it becomes an unconsciously competent skill, then move on to the next thing. And go back and refresh. It's called spaced repetition. You can go back and refresh that thing because you should be keeping all of your notes in a good coaching doc. But just focus on one thing at a time. One mid-funnel tactic. Do that for a bunch of time. Do it across your whole team so that there's, a cumulative effort on it. That I think is where a lot of people go wrong.
That's great. You're kind of preempting my question, Philip. My next focus area was going to be, if we're telling the leaders on the call into 2025, the first part of 2025, how should they implement some of these strategies? Kyle, you just talked a little bit about the one thing is really important. Pick one thing to go after. I would be curious if either of you have any other thoughts on what are some simple tactics, what are some simple ways that they can start inspecting the middle of the funnel, developing some of these tactics to deploy, or even just thinking about it more holistically in general.
I mean, my biggest tip on this always is get it out of your head. Get it out of your head. There are every single leader on this call, live or watching the recording. I don't think there's too much that maybe Kyle and I are saying that you've never thought before or have never kind of this isn't mind blowing. The difference is that I hope you're picking up on this is we have it documented, we have it in front of our teams, and then we are constantly iterating on it, right? So the easiest place to start is if you went through an entire deal and just one time sat down and said, what do you expect to be happening throughout that deal? You would already now have a deal inspection checklist for your people to use. It actually be okay, before something goes from discovery to demo, what should happen? Well, you'd get 6. There it is. This would take maybe 30 minutes for you to build out. Same with the call scorecard. Okay, well, that's the thing you want to happen. Okay, well, how's the best way to do it? How should we ask about pain? How should we ask about impact? How should we ask about these things? This is the easiest thing to possibly do because I believe most leaders have some idea conceptually of what we're talking about. The difference is it lives in their head. And because it lives in their head, inspection lives in your head. The moment this is documented, my reps are inspecting their deals the same way that I would. And then my manager is inspecting the reps inspection, then I can inspect the rep. I would be my number one tip for anyone listening. Get it out of your head, write it down. There are certain things you expect to be happening in the middle of these deals. Take the time to write it out. And now inspection just got a whole lot easier.
Yeah. Katie and I got into this topic when I interviewed him for my podcast. And minutes after we hung up, I went and booked time in my calendar every week. It's called frameworks, something or other, to basically say okay, I normally have time in my calendar to work on this stuff, but let's book a recurring session. It's called the frameworks working session. It's an hour a week, every single week. And there's usually prep work to be done, which is all of my leaders spending some other chunk of time in their calendar documenting stuff that we want to do across the team. Because I'm I would say on the upper end of the documentation spectrum. Katie might have me beat there. But it was a good prompt from him to be just book the time, have it every week. And then I made that change right away. And so it's the checklisting thing and just the writing is super important. You can make this even more efficient. Just use ChatGPT. You can dictate, because a lot of salespeople are better at speaking to think than writing to think. We can have a harder time with that. And so you can just dictate for 10 minutes one of these things and then have ChatGPT convert it into a checklist, convert this into a guide, make this into a training. And you'd be really, really impressed with how well it can transform things for you. And it does all the boring work. Okay, how do I restructure this? How do I do whatever? Just use ChatGPT as your dictation buddy. And then again, go one thing at a time. Just pick one thing. Spend a week or two on that one thing. Don't say you have to, we gotta go checklist our entire whole thing. It'll be too overwhelming. You'll lose enthusiasm and you'll stop doing it. Just say for the next 2 weeks, all we have to do is get pre-call research documented and checklist. And then the next week is how do we ask for next steps and set a great offer of value? And you write a little document on it. Just go one piece at a time. Don't take on too much, because when we get overwhelmed is when we tend to procrastinate. And you'll be in a good spot in no time.
Yeah, we call it the weekly wiggle. That like we have the wiggle, WGLL, what good looks like. It's one of my favorite acronyms, right? Of like the weekly wiggle. It's on the calendar. And in that weekly wiggle, either we are finding out what good looks like or we're documenting it. Sometimes maybe we don't know what good looks like. Like to Kyle's earlier example, like, all right, what is this person doing differently? Well, maybe that week we're trying to figure that out. What is the wiggle? And then other weeks is okay, we know what the wiggle is. Time to write it down. Time to get it down on paper. Time to document it. Use ChatGPT. Put it all together. And I mean, you can transform an org. Absolutely transform an org.
Yeah.
Love it.
Go listen to Kate. If you want to hear like an hour of just this, us jamming on documentation and a bunch of stuff, go listen to I'll put the podcast link in here. You can go listen.
I thought someone put something funny in the chat of pilot checklist, which I think is super important. Pilots don't. I'm a pilot, so you can't get in an airplane without checking the plane, and you can't get in an airplane without flying. You do not want to there's a lot of things that can go wrong on the ground, and so think about that as your sales deals, right? So you wouldn't get on a call with a customer without doing research. You wouldn't understand who the people are on the call, the pain points, that sort of thing, as much as you can. Super important, and so the more that you can have that mentality, I think is really important.
And your manager's job is to reinforce the system.
Yes.
Coach
Yep.
and implement the system.
Yep.
That's their job.
You lead people, you manage processes and systems. That's the difference. And I always joke on the pilot example because I talk about checklists with my team all the time, obviously. And I'm like, who got more training for their jobs? Pilots and surgeons or salespeople? Who got more training? And it's like, obviously pilots. So if pilots can use a checklist, so can we. Because we had a 2-week onboarding program. Like, get your ass on the checklist and follow it. It's making your job easier.
Love it. Love it. Okay, last question. And I think, Kyle, you brought up Kyle, you brought up a cool example around like using ChatGPT to speak into it. That's actually been a game changer for me. After like really important calls, I'll just chat into that. I'll talk with it and it'll help me formulate thoughts, which is really helpful. But I'd be curious, a couple different avenues. How are the both of you and your teams leveraging AI either for internal work, for examples like the one that you just mentioned, but also as you think about implementing AI in the buying process? So as your sales teams are deploying AI to use with their customers, any tips, tricks, recommendations of things that you've seen work well?
Katie's got an AI podcast, so he gets to go first.
Okay.
I mean, I use it in a lot of places. In fact, I had my entire leadership team go through a 6-week AI course. So the Unleashed AI Unleashed course with Jake Dunlap and Brian over at Scaled, put my whole team, my leadership team through it. And since they've gone through it, they have built out call scorecard GPTs, where we can upload the transcript and it tells us how well they did and where to coach to. We've built that out. We have training summary guides put out. We just built out our onboarding like content like through it. Like we leverage it in a lot of places internally first. Some of the prep work that Kyle talked about, the pre-call prep work. So a lead comes in, AI enriched. What's the use cases based off that industry? Bubbling that information up to reps. So that is a big use case for us. And really it's about, I'd say probably one of the heavier ones is around, call it prospect and industry knowledge. What's the terminology? What are the keywords? How do they talk? Like, what are the phrases that we go through? I uploaded a bunch of prospect calls a few weeks ago. I was like, how do they describe the problems? Right? Because like, and y'all sellers, like we describe problems in a certain way that's different than how our prospects say it. Like the example, there's a company that I do some training with, and they always say, data silos. And I go, have you ever heard a prospect say that? Have you ever once heard a prospect like, yeah, our data is in silos? And they're like, well, no. I was like, then you're not describing the problem the right way. Load up a bunch of like, how do they describe the problem? They probably say things like, our data's all over the place. That would be a better way to say it than data silos. So I use it a lot for like pattern recognition, consolidation, like what was the theme in these calls? So those are a bunch of ways that we are leveraging it internally for our team. There's not too much yet that I'm leveraging it externally, if I'm being honest, like for the buyers, and Kyle, I don't know if you are maybe potentially, but there's not too much that I'm doing to the buyer side yet that is leveraging AI. Most of it's internal to make it easier for the rep to do their job for the buyer. But I can't honestly say I'm doing too much buyer AI enablement stuff right now.
We built an AI website grader
Okay.
So we can
Pretty good.
take every prospect website and yank in their entire digital presence, and it goes through this big scoring algorithm. But there's an entire product team just working on this thing. Um, and it's an insane lead magnet, super helpful for call prep. So that's our buyer facing application of AI, but that's being built by the product team, not go to market. On go to market, I'm the same as Katie. It's all internal stuff. We're using Momentum to analyze call transcripts, fill out their Salesforce for them, give you call summaries. You can query whatever you want. I've weaved in some like audit mechanisms, like written a prompt. Did the sales rep specifically mention the 5% guest service fee that at checkout? So that if that's like a thing that I want to know is happening on every single call, so that deals where that's not present, um, you will be alerted. It goes into Slack, alerts the manager in like a I can't remember what the channel is called, but like it's like about deal issues. Or if the
Sure.
customer mentions we're under renovation, it gets pinged to the channel because we don't want to close a deal if it's under renovation. Though that could take months and it's just like not good business. So we have a lot of that. We have an AI call simulator that we use for training. We've built our own machine learning models for lead scoring. We've got we're pretty like wired up internally with stuff. To I think AI is best placed internally facing, make your organization better. Uh,
Mhm.
Lots of people are having success with prospecting with AI. It could be a race to the bottom, and I think most people do it wrong.
Mhm.
Like if you want to know how to do it right, follow Jordan Crawford and understand sort of like systems of agents and agents as workflow versus like, hey, AI SDR, just like email my whole market. I think that's like very much uh, um, it's a sugar rush. It's going to work a little bit for a little bit of time, but it's you're going to exhaust your market and it'll hurt your brand and it's not going to work for that long. So we're mostly internally facing.
Makes sense. Super helpful. I think we're just about at time for panelists. Sorry, the panel questions. So I'm going to open it up. If you have questions, please drop them in. I think Brittany's been collecting some of them. We've got one to kick us off. The first one that we have is we found that our best reps each have their own approach to moving deals in the middle of funnel. How do you standardize best practices without stifling individual expertise that makes top performers successful? Great question. Any thoughts? Maybe I'll go to Kitty, you first.
I have a lot of thoughts on this. So my I'll preface this with there's some context I don't have to this question, but a top performer is a top performer. Okay. So if all of your reps are performing equally, then okay, but we got to make sure one, are we actually looking at a top performer? But also, I'd be willing to bet there is significant overlap in some of those things, meaning it's not completely different. So, what I'm looking for are the patterns, right? So, for example, the odds that they are doing it all completely differently to multi-thread, pretty slim. But let's say
Mhm.
there's like 2 to 3 ways they're doing it differently. That's good enough for me. That's good enough for me. There's 2 to 3 ways to accomplish this thing, but what they're accomplishing to move it stage to stage, I'd be willing to bet has pretty significant overlap. The what is probably consistent, the how might be a little bit different. I'm okay with 2 to 3 different hows to accomplish the what, but I know for a fact if we don't have a good problem agreement, that's going to kill a deal. Now,
Mhm.
how you get that problem agreement, I'm okay to some different ways there, but the what is probably pretty strong in terms of consistency. But I would say look at your best, right? Like, because if they're all equal, then they're all equal. But there's probably someone that's doing it a little bit better. What are they doing?
This really
When you see
smart guy.
some, oh, go
Uh,
ahead, Cal.
I was gonna say this really smart guy gave me this quote: "Emulate before you innovate."
Oh yeah.
It was Katie. That was the smart guy. And so yeah, you want to get your reps emulating your system as much as they can, but you then give them freedom and grace to go color outside the lines and try new stuff. I want to encourage people to um, try new things and innovate. Like bottoms up is where your smartest ideas are going to come from. Your reps are doing it all day, every day, and if you're hiring good people, you wanna follow their innovation. I give them some guidance, like, hey, just do one new thing at a time. Don't
Mhm.
change your discovery and change how you do next steps, because then depending on how, maybe things are going well, or maybe your conversion rates are improving or not. But if you change three things, you have no idea what is better. So let your reps innovate, like let them have a hypothesis and be like, "Ooh, I should try this thing," and encourage them to test one thing at a time. And then if that's a good idea, and if you have the right culture where people feel empowered and encouraged to bring this stuff up, they'll drop it in a channel, they'll ping you, and then it's your job to go like review what they're doing and be like, "Ooh, this is actually pretty sick. Like let's roll that into our script." And if you can improve your scripts over time that are all rep driven innovations, your environment transforms itself. Your environment, because your reps are now empowered and excited and they're part of the system, they feel like they've had a role in writing that script, which, the endowment effect is very powerful. They'll feel a lot more attached to wanting to do it this same way. um so yeah, that's how you can get the best of both worlds, get the best of bottoms up innovation while also driving like some standardization of the best practice.
Yeah. I like to think of it as like a bowling alley, like the bumpers. You get the bumpers up, and you can have your reps
Hmm.
operate inside of the bumpers. But if you can bounce them back towards the middle, there's certain grounds where you don't want them to cross. I like the framing too, Katie, around like the what. So really, really great examples. Okay, gonna move on to the next question. This question's from Bonnie. Then the question is, how often do you test your approach or method? What's the trigger or fix when broken, or continuous experimentation? Do you wait for market related triggers to, I'm assuming, change things? Kind of curious how you guys approach this. So I guess maybe the question is, how do you iterate your approach? How often do you change it? And what signals do you use, or what signals would be indicative that you should change it?
Ooh, I mean, I'll say constantly is the blanket answer, like constantly testing and tweaking, trying new things. I pay very close attention to what the market is doing. Right. So if something changes in the market, it should change probably what we're doing. So I'm very abreast to what's going on in the market that I'm playing with. But also to Kyle's point is like, dude, someone tries something new and it's working and working well, change it. Like, all right,
Hmm.
cool. And then the 4 Ds that I talk about for scale is define, document, demonstrate, deliberately practice. If a rep tried something new and it's working better, this is the key. It's working better than what has been taught. Well, that becomes the new wiggle. Hey, y'all, this works better. And it came from a rep. So we define it, we document it, we demonstrate it, right? We train on it, and we deliberately practice it. So it's constant iteration, but also, and something I know Kyle and I vibe on a lot is I'm constantly learning. Like I am reading, I am listening, and I'll hear something new and go, ooh, we haven't even thought about doing that before, right? Like just literally 2 days ago, maybe 2 days, one day ago, 2 days ago, I cold call Kyle, right? Out of nowhere, just to be like, yo, I kind of got this batshit crazy idea. Hear me out here. Tell me if I'm crazy or not. But it's just constant iterations where I see something, I learn it, and then I try it. So it's constant. It's constantly iterating, but it's iterating. I actually don't change things often. I iterate. Change to me is a complete directional difference, right? Change is hard. Change happens after like something big is occurred, or like we've missed whatever 2 quarters in a row. It's like, okay, something has to change now. Change is big
Mm-hmm.
to me. Iteration is constant.
Love it.
Yeah, no notes.
Okay.
Constant iteration. The only thing I'll add is you just have to have a mechanism to look at this stuff every month. So for us, it's our monthly business review that RevOps and BizOps runs. And so there's a grid by every segment and every conversion rate. And we can see on this grid, red, yellow, green. Steve,
Mm-hmm.
my head of RevOps, who's an absolute wizard, um, he runs this thing and he builds this spreadsheet and shows us like, where are we ahead of target, where are we behind, where are the areas of opportunity. So every single month we all collectively come together, we're looking at this big sheet, and you can say, okay, what's the payoff probability and perspiration of changing one of these things, make a collective decision. Hey, we're all going to go all in on inbound demo book to show rates. That's our thing. And we got some projects on it. We've got some coaching we're going to do. Like again, focus and critical mass means a lot here. Having multiple people all working on one thing brings just like a level of momentum to it, but it's every single month. And having a routine for it is really helpful. Having your routine for your wiggle meeting, or for me, it's my frameworks meeting, have a routine for MBR where you're reviewing the stuff and coming up with ideas and game plans. Like build this into your system so you don't have to just remember to do this stuff, but like there's a calendar invite that's recurring every month. It's a set agenda and it forces you to do these things. This is environmental design, a la James Clear, a la nudge theory and behavioral economics. Like make the system you put around you uh, guide you to the right behaviors. So that's your recurring meeting invites. It's the structure of your meeting agenda template. It's your prompts and reminders. Like build that scaffolding around you, and this stuff will get done.
Awesome. Okay. On to the next one. This is from Sumaya. What if CEOs are pushing for pipeline build because they're worried the market is growing rapidly and we need to get as many deals closed won as we can before our competitors get them? And while we're doing that, we can have a team that's constantly diagnosing and analyzing our pipeline health. Excuse me.
Yes. It's got to be both. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you gotta, that's why you have BDR teams and leaders and growth and demand gen leaders, and you've got sales leaders so that you can work on multiple things at one time. Yeah, your growth leader should be obsessing about filling top of the funnel, and we should be trying to do as much of that as we can within certain spend limits. And same with your BDR team, and then your sales leaders need to be obsessing over checklisting and frameworks. Yes, you gotta do it.
Katie, anything to add or plus?
I mean, honestly, I'm just gonna plus one that one. It's like it's both. The only thing I'll add is like diagnose where the problem is. Like, is it actually a pipeline problem, or could you 2x close rates? Okay, could you do both? What happens if you 2x pipeline and 2x close rates? Like, oh boy, does it get fun there? So it's just diagnosing what the cause of each potentially is and go from there.
Great. Okay, moving right along. Question from Perry. How are you incentivizing app rigor to ensure you're getting the data you need at every step? I found that there's a delicate balance between how much data we're able to collect and the amount of admin we're requiring. I'm guessing like balance between analysis and data collection and then leveraging it in the right way. How do you guys approach that?
I try to make it pretty simple, to be honest, and we block the time for it. Like my reps end their week with a little end of week recap of like, okay, that's where they're doing their one-on-one docs. That's where they're doing some of the deal, like, management docs and things like that. That's just how they end the week, but it's blocked. It's blocked time to do it. So that's key. But also I constantly am looking like, okay, like how much am I actually asking of them? Like actually one of my favorite early leadership books was Cracking the Sales Management Code by Jason Jordan. And it's one of the few books that actually brought up like time capacity as a measurement. Like you can ask your people to do all these things, but like how much time does it really take,
Yeah.
and cognizant of that. And so right now with one of my sales orgs right now is lead handling by the AEs is not quite where I want it to be, right? I don't feel like we're handling all of our inbound leads the right way. However, one of the first questions I brought to my leadership team was like, do they actually have the time to do it the way I want it done? If they are now running 3 to 4 new demos per day, is it possible that they actually just don't have the time to do it this way? Not just get on them and crack the whip and go, like they may not have the time. So I'm very cognizant of how much time do things take. And if I believe it's important, I'm going to create the time. If I don't believe it's important, I'm not going to rigor it. I'm not going to expect it or ask for it. Like my team knows this. My expectations are my expectations. I don't have a lot of them, but I mean them. I mean them. If it's an expectation, it's an expectation. But if I don't truly expect you to do it every single time, I'm probably not even going to ask for it.
Yeah. Time study is really important. This is why AI for internal stuff is important.
Oh.
Get rid of all the low value non-revenue generating activities so that you can ask for your reps to do the important stuff.
Yeah. I think I saw some stat. I think it's the average like 30%, 40% of a lot of companies' reps time is spent on non-rev generating things, which is just crazy. It's
More.
probably higher. Yeah, it's probably
Like,
higher. Yeah.
I did a time analysis for this team I inherited a couple companies ago, and 40% of the time they were calling bad leads. Like the leads were too junior, not the right fit, wrong company, and they were spending another 20% of their time on like lead research to find those bad leads. 60%, 3 out of 5 days of their week was basically spent on like nothing.
Wow.
And so my BDRs don't do any lead research of their own. They'll maybe comb through Salesforce to find some like little nuggets here and there. They've got their special reports of, oh, like the 90 day mark when something goes from inbound to like outbound eligible, they'll surf that. But other than that, like every day their sales loft cadences get filled for them so they can just sit down and call. That's how you get the right productivity.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, it's why we're also so focused, Superhuman as a company is focused on saving time back in email too, right? How can we make email more efficient that you can get back to customers faster, but then also, save time in doing that. Okay, next question is from Adrian. We probably have time for one or two more. Is how do we pitch this idea of change versus iteration for our executives and reps? I feel like a bit of a problem is that executives don't understand the value in investing in constant iteration without taking the risk of change.
Why does your executive need to have any say there? This is your job. Run sales. Make it better. Do things that don't require their approval. Your executive isn't gonna not let you change the demo script or build a checklist or write a guide. If you've got a very opinionated leader, then just do the things that they are not laser focused on and get in the habit of this iteration, and then that will buy you some trust and credibility to do the bigger things.
I love this question because it falls into something we talked about earlier. Sell, don't tell. You want to change something? Sell me on it. Don't tell me it. You should be able to sell why you want to change. I want to change the disco. Sell me on it. Why? What's the change? Why do you believe it's better? What do you think it will lead to? You have to be able to sell the idea as well. Too often people do, they make changes, but they never actually walk through like, all right, what is this actually going to do? Or am I just changing to change? Am I just doing something different? Sell it. I love to be sold. I love, Katie, I want to change this. Love it. Sell me. I say that all the time. Oh, we should change this. Love it. Sell me. Well, I was like, okay, take some time, come back to me and sell me on why this will be better. I'm ready to hear it when you can actually justify why we're iterating. Why do you believe this will be better? Oh, I just recently read this thing. And based off this thing, we're not doing this. And if we start doing this, I think we should do this. And I think that will allow our prospect to do X, Y, Z. Ooh.
And what is the payoff? What is the
There.
probability that it works?
Yeah.
And what is the perspiration to do it? That would be a great framework to make your case.
Right there. Right there.
Awesome. Okay, last question before we do a sign off. I think let's take this one from let's see. How do you adjust your middle of funnel strategy for different deal sizes or customer segments? Does the approach need to be different for enterprise versus mid-market deals?
Yes. Yeah. Yes, it's different. How do you adjust it? It's based off what we said very early on, just like the different behaviors that have to occur on the sales side and the enterprise side, right? Like, okay, on an enterprise side, there's different behaviors that buyer has to take to buy. So I'm optimizing my sales rep behavior to match that behavior. It just becomes longer. Like my deal management docs for like, I don't even use deal management docs for like my 2-day turnaround deals. It's too fast. Like we use call scorecards and that's it. For my 2 to 3 monthers, that's a deal management doc. For my 6 to 9 monthers, that's a longer deal management doc because it takes longer to do it, right? So that's how I look at it. But it's very different. It's very different.
Yeah. You got different benchmarks, learn from different people. You got to swim in a different information ecosystem. Definitely different.
Cool. Okay. Well, I want to thank both of you. This has been awesome. Thanks for taking the time. Appreciate all the expertise, the advice, the tactics. Been really, really great. Would love everyone's feedback. Appreciate everyone joining us. I think we're going to be sending out a survey if you guys can fill that out and give us feedback on this. This is part of an ongoing series that we'll be doing called Stage 1 to Close 1 at Superhuman. So more of these to come in the future, but really appreciate the two of you joining and appreciate all the great questions and guests joining as well. So I'll leave that here, but everyone have a great rest of your week and hope to chat soon.
That was a blast. Thanks, everybody.
Everybody.